I grew up playing GameCube and PlayStation 2 games, but while I was playing Kingdom Hearts and Mario Sunshine, I had friends who were playing DevilMayCry and Resident Evil. I'll eventually get around to Resident Evil, but for now, I'm going to take a look at the PlayStation 2 trilogy of DevilMayCry games, and I want to give my thoughts as a newcomer to the series. Let's begin with this almost 22-year-old game. Let's take a look at the good, the bad, and the polarizing elements that make 2001's Devil May Cry. Let's get the minor nitpicks out of the way. First, the voice acting is bad. I can somewhat excuse this since it was 2001 and standards for voice acting are not what they are now. Also, Capcom games are known for bad voice acting, to a point where I'm kind of convinced that it's done on purpose.
Ah! No, this isn't happening! There's no reason for me to go on. What? What am I fighting for?
You can stop right there, Leon. Not a bad move. Very smooth.
Well, well, what do we have here? Nature calls? It's in the back. You were the first one to know about my vengeance. It looks like I'm getting closer.
Second nitpick is the story. Now, I'm not expecting Yoko Taro levels of writing, but not a whole lot happens in Devil May Cry's narrative. Dante is told to go to an island and defeat his father's nemesis. He does so without question and defeats the big bad. And that's kind of it. I know I left some details out, especially about Trish, but overall it does feel like that the stakes are low and the conclusion is fairly lackluster. It also does not help that Trish disappears for about 90% of the game, leaving Dante by himself and nobody to interact with.
The castle is above this cliff. Come on, let's go! Ha!
This is fairly disheartening because Dante is an entertaining protagonist, having a snarky attitude with the fashion and bravado to back it up. I can see why people like this character. My third nitpick is the lack of tutorials. Now, I cannot blame the game itself for this, because back in 2001, when you bought a game, it came with a manual. If you wanted to know anything about a game's mechanics, it would be in that booklet. Without any tutorials, you're left to figure out everything on your own. But hey, maybe you enjoy that sort of challenge. And then there are the controls, which by modern standards are very strange. X is to jump, that's normal. Square and circle are interact keys, and triangle is to swing your sword. R1 plus square and circle is to use your guns. Why are there two dedicated button inputs to using your guns and only one for your sword? And to do your fancy sword tricks, you press R1 and triangle. You think those fancy sword tricks would have been dedicated to square or circle. As weird as the controls can be, you do get used to it over time. Okay, those were the minor complaints that I can mostly forgive. But now I need to address some things that really bothered me. Starting with the fixed camera angle. I'm fully aware that this game was supposed to be a Resident Evil title, and the fixed camera angle is the biggest sign of it. But I don't think that excuses the number of times you'll die because you could not see something on your screen. Combine this with auto-targeting. The issue with auto-targeting is that the game does not always prioritize the enemy that you want. I think it locks onto the enemy closest to you when the enemy that you personally are targeting might have been knocked off to the side or maybe even behind another enemy. The best way to somewhat mitigate this issue is to use firearms with large hitboxes, but I'll talk about the guns in this game later. But even that band-aid fix does not solve the issue. There are certain fights where you need to interact with the environment, but the game just wants you to fight the nearest enemy. Scenarios like this result in you taking damage that otherwise could have been avoided if the game just lets you have full control. As a result, it does feel like you're fighting with the game itself half of the time. And if you do die from any of this nonsense, then you will realize that any healing items you use will not be restored upon respawn, nor the currency used to buy said items. If you use it, you lose it. Healing items are only worth it if you can stay alive to complete the mission. Otherwise, I was better off taking the L and saving my currency to buy new moves for my weapons. If you watch any of my previous videos, then you know I have a deep appreciation for video game music. And DevilMayCry's music, it's not bad, but I do think it's more enjoyable to listen to when you are playing the actual game. A few tracks that stood out to me were Sparta's theme, Ultraviolet, and Hell's Great Temple. Again, it's not bad, but it's not something I listen to while I'm making videos or doing any of my other daily tasks. Whereas the music I don't mind, the game's mission structure is something I'm conflicted with. I rather have one large manner to explore as opposed to being timed in individual segments. If you're into speedrunning, then the current format may be appealing for you. But for me personally, if I'm being timed and graded, then I feel pressure to hit straight to the objective rather than taking my time to explore the area. Plus, the missions tend to waver in difficulty and length, some being very short and easy, and plenty of others that were moderately difficult or just felt unfair. And for a time, I genuinely did think that this game was hard. Enemies do a ton of damage, you're constantly fighting against the camera, and then there's also stagger. As much as this infuriated me, I also later realized that I can also stagger my enemies. Revenge tastes sweet. Something else that made the game easier is Devil Trigger. Initially I thought Devil Trigger only increased your movement speed, but it also does two other things. It increases your damage and attack speed. This would allow me to just brute force my way through certain encounters, especially boss fights. I'm pretty sure for some this would diminish the game's challenge and difficulty, but for me I was just so fed up with certain fights that I gladly took the easy way out. But this is not to say that Devil Trigger is an instant win button. It just makes things easier. So these first two compliments are pretty minor in the grand scheme of everything, but hey, I appreciate them. The first being the gothic environment. It's an architectural style that has grown on me over the years. Thank you, Bloodborne. The second one are the animations that play when you select a gun from the menu. It's a fun detail that the developers didn't need to do, but they did. And it's kind of nice to see something that a lot of other games don't do. But the guns themselves in combat are a large highlight. When I first got the shotgun, I thought that my pistols would be obsolete. Thankfully, I was wrong. In fact, every gun in this game is useful. You need to find the correct scenarios for them. The pistols Ebony and Ivory are good for long range, the shotgun is good for short range, and the grenade launcher is useful against groups of enemies in small spaces. The only gun that I did not use was the one that eats away at your devil trigger. But otherwise, I was glad to see that my arsenal of ranged weapons were still useful even more than halfway through the game. I'm pretty sure this also applies to the melee weapons, but admittedly I did stick with the Alistair for the grand majority of my playthrough, only occasionally experimenting with the other weapons. Also, let me just say that the cinematic for the Alistair's introduction is pretty cool. Honestly, these cutscenes are just the chocolate syrup on top of a scoop of ice cream. They just ooze with personality and style while giving a short demonstration of the weapon's playstyle. Alistair is a great sword coated in electricity, emphasizing its attack speed. Ifrit is a pair of fiery gauntlets where you punch enemies in the face. And Sparta is a sword that turns into a scythe. If the weapons are satisfying to use, then overall combat is as well, right? Yes, but not for the reasons you may think. I would compare DevilMayCry 1 to something like Super Smash Bros. Melee or Marvel vs. Capcom 3. Games that have a lot of jank and unintended features, resulting in the community discovering certain exploits. I did discover some of DMC1's advanced techniques on my own, but I was surprised by how much more there was that I still did not know about. This results in the game having a high enough skill and knowledge ceiling that makes combat more enjoyable. Perhaps enjoyable in a mischievous way, since we are abusing exploits that I'm pretty sure the game developers did not intend. But we can't fix the camera angle. Honestly, I don't know how to feel about DevilMayCry 1. We have a fun protagonist in a lackluster story. Combat can be fun when exploiting the game, but then becomes incredibly frustrating because you have no control of the camera. By the time I was done with the game, I was just glad it was over. It's kind of like doing chores. Chores are never fun, but when they are done, you are glad they are done. I really wanted to say that Devil May Cry is a product of its time or something along those lines. But I can't, because 1 year later, in 2002, we got Kingdom Hearts, a game that has none of the issues that I presented here in Devil May Cry. So the problem is not that Devil May Cry 1 is an old game. The problem is that it's a remnant of a defunct Resident Evil project, and it shows. I think we can still argue that Devil May Cry has its influence on the 3D hack and slash genre. Bayonetta, Nier Automata, and Final Fantasy XVI would not be what they are without Devil May Cry 1. I may not be the biggest fan of Devil May Cry 1, but I can at least appreciate it. But I'm not giving up on the series just yet. And yes, I will be playing Devil May Cry 2 despite its reputation. Maybe I'll be that weirdo that actually enjoys Devil May Cry 2. Or maybe I'm being blindly optimistic.